What do you have to say to the Americans who are questioning why President Trump should endorse you when many say that you've been vehemently against his agenda?
Do you speak for all these Americans? I don't understand.
Yeah, been borderline pro-amnesty, red flag laws.
Are you being paid?
Anti-border
Are you
wall.
being paid by the Paxton campaign?
No, I'm just a concerned American citizen representing millions of other Americans.
No, I think you're a paid influencer.
So let's do our little weekly RINO check-in, or whatever we want to call this, but it is obviously primary season. We have major redistricting battles going on, and underlying all of it is, of course, the civil war between Trump and MAGA and the old guard establishment of the Republican Party, who still just do not get it. They are losers, they are cowards, they refuse to play to win, they constantly like to hand victory to the left, and people are getting rather sick of it. Well, I can report to you this week once again that Trump's movement has had a pretty overwhelming victory over the RINOs. On one hand, we got to talk about South Carolina, and we've been covering this redistricting battle where the RINO state Senate leader has been saying he's against the redistricting because he's a principled conservative who believes there needs to be a viable and healthy Democrat party in this country, basically saying Republicans should play to lose because obviously Democrats are doing the exact same stuff to us. They constantly draw us out of our congressional maps, but if we do the same to them, that's not principled or something. Well, it turns out that after Trump got involved, he basically intimidated a sizable enough majority of the South Carolina State Senate to move ahead with redistricting. We managed to avoid another Indiana example, likely because these people saw what happened to the Republicans of Indiana and said, okay, if Trump is behind the redistricting, there's nothing we can do to fight it. So a huge defeat for them there. On one hand, we'll discuss that, but I also want to talk about this Texas Senate primary, where after the Republican Senate leadership refused to get the SAVE Act passed, Trump said, okay, no more deals, no more compromises. I'm going to endorse the MAGA candidate over the establishment candidate, and that's exactly what you deserve. And John Thune and the Senate Republicans clearly appear to be fuming over this, but it's just the simple reality. You want Trump's loyalty, you want the loyalty of the voters too, by the way. It's not just about Trump. Then do the things that you get elected to do. And as a result of their inaction, as the result of, again, them basically playing to lose instead of playing to win, well, now it's the case that RINO Senator John Cornyn is on track to lose anyway. So you enjoy losing so much, then go and lose, right, RINOs? But we'll get into both of these stories, guys. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. That is the best way to support our work, and it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And that said, if you remember when we last checked in on this, it was not looking all that good in South Carolina because the Senate leader came out against it. You may remember it was the same situation in Indiana where, like a cult, they all went to follow. Most of them did the Senate leader. And so, he said, I'm against redistricting. They, by the way, failed. They did not advance a vote in the state Senate to get a redistricting session done. Then the governor overrid it and said, no, we're going to do a redistricting special session anyway. But basically, I was still skeptical because if the votes were not there to advance a special session, would the votes be there to pass redistricting? It didn't seem like the support was there. That was, of course, until President Trump stepped in this week and released the following statement, which effectively was a political earthquake in South Carolina. And in this case, the RINOs didn't even try to fight it, most of them. They basically said, oh, I guess that's what we got to do now. We don't want to end up like Indiana. So here was the statement. He says, the South Carolina State Senate has a big vote tomorrow. This was in the past, but on redistricting. I'm watching closely along with all Republicans across the country who are counting on their elected leaders to use every legal and constitutional authority they have to stop the radical left Democrats from destroying our country, including leveling the playing field against their decades of egregious gerrymandering and census rigging. South Carolina Republicans, be bold and courageous, just like the Republicans of Tennessee were last week. Move the U.S. House primaries to August. Leave the rest on the same schedule. Everything will be fine. Get it done. And so you do notice Trump here doesn't even make an explicit threat like Indiana. He's going to primary people who do not get on board with this, but obviously it's a coded threat considering what we just saw, what went down there, and how, by the way, successful Trump was. He's sweeping these RINOs by 20 points. I'm not sure what the Republicans in the South Carolina State Senate were thinking, but all of a sudden it appears they have completely changed their minds and have now passed the 7 Republican, 0 Democrat congressional map that draws out that old geriatric fossil Jim Clyburn from congressional power, overriding the RINO obstruction once again in a 27-17 vote. Apparently, one of the Republicans was previously against it, and then he actually flipped sides to be pro-redistricting. I wonder why that could be the case. I'm sure it definitely was not some sense of self-preservation. So there you had it. Also worth noting, by the way, if you're curious which rhinos who tried to stop it or ended up voting against it in the end, that includes state senators, I should say, Massey, Bennett, Campson, Davis, Hembry, Rankel, and Zell. So if that's any of you in South Carolina, make sure you vote for anyone in the Republican primary who are not these fools and characters right here. So undeniably, that is a big victory for us. That's a congressional seat. That, by the way, I'm very glad that we didn't have to go down the whole Indiana route and the rhinos basically came to their senses and understood that the writing was on the wall for them. At the same time, I have to say it's extremely frustrating because it's sad that we don't have largely a Republican Party in this country that still doesn't get it, or that does get it, I guess I should say there. Because let's be honest, it should be self-evident, it should be self-explanatory why following a Supreme Court ruling that outlaws race-based congressional districts as unconstitutional, and a lot of these so-called principled conservative types claim to care so much about the Constitution, that should just be a no-brainer, right? It's not something that Trump should have to step in and basically beat you over the head to force you to do. Or we should have Republican politicians in this country who basically want to win anyway. And my concern there is that, well, right now, it's great that we have this like magnanimous leader in charge who has this firm grip over the party. But let's be honest, Trump's not going to be there forever. And even if he successfully hands the reins to someone like Vance or Rubio, no offense to them, but let's just be real. Whoever Trump's successor is probably not going to have the same power as Trump, right? Trump is one of a kind. And so going forward, we kind of have to have Republican politicians who, to some degree, can fend for themselves and on their own without having to be told what to do, just have a natural instinct. Oh, we should play to win. Oh, we should want to beat the Democrats. Oh, we should want to defeat the left and make sure they're not able to take power and stop constantly handing these people victories. I mean, is that really something that needs to be explained? Why we should have to even waste our energy making primary threats to these people so that they should comply? I think that's heavily disappointing, to be honest. Again, it should just be something that you do. It shouldn't be a debate. It shouldn't be a fight. We shouldn't still have a handful of Republican politicians, including the state Senate leader, by the way, who are trying to obstruct this whole deal. And there has to even be drama. It should just be a unanimous consensus thing. But that said, another positive trend we have noted, and we'll talk about right now, upcoming in Texas, is that whatever has happened in 2026, it feels like the Republican voter base is more awake in primaries, right? We've seen a lot of rhinos who survived a lot of past challenges because of low voter education are suddenly getting taken out. There's this new passion. There's this new energy. Maybe it's what the rhinos in the end were ultimately fearful of. And I don't think there's any better example than the current Senate primary over in Texas.
He thinks I'm the best candidate and that I will actually help him get some of these things done, like the Save America Act, which I have been promoting since they first passed it in the U.S. House. So it's something that I've been disappointed in, that the Senate hasn't gotten done, that John Cornyn has not been successful. And, you know, I even challenged him right after the primary. I said, look, he hasn't accomplished anything in 42 years of anything good. No one's been able to tell me what that is over the last 14 months. I'll give him a chance. Maybe he can get this one really important thing done, and I'll consider dropping out. And sure enough, he couldn't get that done.
Yeah, so basically what's happening over in Texas is that we have a Senate primary between a incumbent establishment rhino-esque guy and a hardcore MAGA warrior. So the incumbent is a guy by the name of John Cornyn. You may have heard of him. He basically, as Paxton described in that clip, is your typical do-nothing establishment politician. He's a part of the Senate Republican leadership in a sense, which is not exactly the most ringing endorsement of him given the state of Republican leadership in the U.S. Senate. He's constantly one of the guys always compromising and making deals with Democrats. His record on key issues like the Second Amendment, immigration, and amnesty is pretty atrocious, especially given he's the senator of Texas. You think at the very least Second Amendment, you know, that would be his thing, but It turns out that's not the case. And while I might not put him as bad on the level of, say, Lisa Murkowski, he's really not the best. He's really one of the people you look at and say, I'd like to see them replaced. So that's him on one hand. On the other hand, we have Ken Paxton, who is a hardcore MAGA warrior, as you could probably tell. Former Attorney General of Texas, made a really big deal out of fighting against the COVID tyranny, fighting hard against the left, attacking the Biden administration on the border. A lot of these, I mean, he's a solid guy, right? The problem, though, with Paxton is that he does have a lot of like scandals around him. And to be fair, I believe most of those to be political hit jobs. In fact, I was attacked by liberal local media in Texas back in 2022 for calling the impeachment trials against him to be a RINO Democrat collusion attempt to get out one of the most effective attorney generals that Texas has had. So this is the situation. So on one hand, you have the establishment incumbent loser who sucks, but he's been there a long time. And then we have the MAGA guy who's way better on the issues, but maybe has some personal baggage. And so, the argument that the Cornyn camp would make is that, well, we need to beat James Tallarico, which we all agree that we do. And so, yeah, Cornyn may not be the best, but hey, maybe he's more electable because he's a little bit more moderate and he doesn't have maybe the same personal baggage, although I don't think Cornyn's exactly perfect, but okay, fair. But on the other hand, Paxton's argument is, well, he's just a better candidate, right? He's better on the issues. John Cornyn sucks. We want a MAGA guy to get in there. And so this has been the issue is, well, maybe, sure, I can see the argument that, maybe with Paxton, you run the risk more of losing the election, especially if it is a huge blue wave year and you don't want to give power to that lunatic Tallarico. On the other hand, though, I would point out, I don't necessarily know if that's true because very often that is the conventional thinking. The establishment moderate guy is going to be the most electable. But as we often see sometimes, when you're that kind of alienating to your own loyal hardcore voter base, that can be an issue for you. You can have low turnout. Midterms are about turnout. So you also want to have a candidate that energizes and excites the Republicans at the same time. So, whatever it is. But basically to explain, it's sort of that typical story. I think it's not the first time we've seen something like this in a Republican primary. It's like electability versus policy. Which one do we value more? And there's this debate going back and forth. Okay, so to make a long story short, the election is now headed to a runoff, and thus far, President Trump has stayed out of endorsing either guy. For a number of reasons, maybe the electability factor is something he's considering, but the main, really chief component there is that he was promised by John Thune and the Senate Republican leadership that, hey, if you endorse John Cornyn, we'll get the SAVE Act passed for you. So it's a deal behind the scenes of, hey, maybe this is a compromise to be made. Well, I don't know if you could tell, but Senate Republicans have not passed the SAVE Act, okay? They completely dropped the ball. They refused to circumvent the filibuster in any way. They refused to find an alternative solution. They just totally lied about that. And so what Trump has said in response is, okay, maybe if I was torn a little bit before because maybe there's certain reasons to endorse Cornyn, no, I'm going to come out, and this week he did exactly that and endorsed Ken Paxton in the race. So he basically said to the Senate Republican leadership who likes Cornyn, and Cornyn's kind of a part of their little clique, F you, if you're not going to get the job done, if you're not going to deliver, then I'm going to replace you with senators who will, or at least move us a lot closer toward actually getting the job done. And as a result, this week, we did see John Thune himself, the Senate Republican leader, kind of fuming about it. And there did reportedly appear to be some type of widespread shock internally within the Senate Republican leadership of, did he really just do that? We can't believe it. Ken Paxton is coming to the Senate. Like, a lot of these people are genuinely terrified. And take a listen for yourself. So this is John Thune basically rebelling against Trump, saying, no, I'm going to go alongside John Cornyn till the very end.
Given that you've spent months trying to persuade the president to endorse John Cornyn in the Texas primary, and given that the NRSC has invested heavily to help Cornyn win that primary, how personally disappointed or frustrated are you with the president's decision to endorse Ken Paxton today?
Well, I think you all know my position on this issue. I've made it very clear for months now. And Senator Cornyn is a principled conservative. He is a very effective senator for the state of Texas. And but none of us control what the president does. He made his decision about that. That doesn't change the way I feel. And I am certainly supportive of, will continue to be supportive of Senator Cornyn and his reelection.
Yeah, well, needless to say, they are pissed. They were fuming. You can almost see the shock on their faces. Undeniably, they're not very happy about this. And in a rare moment, John Thune is even trying to publicly counter-signal Trump, which usually he does behind the scenes, but now you're seeing him say, but no, we're still behind Cornyn, and we're going to keep on wasting money from the NRCC, which is meant to be for the general elections against the Democrats, on someone who clearly is not going to even win his primary, but as a throwaway against Trump. Very effective Republican leadership, by the way. So glad we have, idiots like this in charge. But anyways, here's the thing, is that we had a deal. It was very simple. To be fair to both Trump and the RINOs, I don't think it was out of bounds or ridiculous. Pass the SAVE Act and I'll endorse Cornyn, because that also makes a statement of, hey, I believe you guys are do-nothing politicians, but if you do something, if you prove me wrong, if you maybe surprise me a little bit, then fine, I'll endorse you. I actually thought that made perfect sense. And of course, what happened? The Senate Republicans did not pass the SAVE Act. What did John Cornyn do to contribute, by the way? I know recently he's been campaigning as this pro-Trump guy, as all the RINOs do when they're up for re-election. Even Thomas Massie as another example there. But truth be told, he, didn't actually want to nuke the filibuster. He didn't want to find a way around it. He wasn't getting creative. All the compromise deals he tries to make with Democrats, he couldn't get this one done. In reality, he didn't care. None of them cared. So why are you going to turn around now and be shocked and surprised? Hey, the do-nothing politicians, Trump's not happy, we're going to get you out. Well, there you go. Now, here is the deal, is that if you wanted to have another referendum, as if we needed one, on who controls the Republican Party, is it John Thune or is it Donald Trump? Well, take a look at this. The polls were pretty neck and neck before. Paxton seemed like he might win, who knows? But basically, right after Trump's endorsement, the polling difference has been monumental. As an example here, according to a recent poll out of SoCal Strategies, Paxton is now at 56.8% in the GOP runoff. Cornyn dropped down all the way to 35%. Even in the Real Clear Politics polling average, which is generally slow to catch up to some recent news, Paxton is now taken close to a 10-point lead. And so it's very obvious where this is going. Cornyn stands no chance. He needed the Trump endorsement. That was everything, because we've noted before, by the way, that the Texas electorate this time around in 2026 is headed in a very MAGA direction, and they want to get a lot of these establishment losers out. Examples I've noted, first and foremost, the fact that Paxton, as the MAGA warrior guy, made it that far toward the runoff and did very well, notably in the past, usually especially in I don't know if you call Texas a southern state, but those typically deep red states where the GOP is an institution, we've historically seen it be the case that an incumbent senator has a very easy path to re-election. And now that's not the case in Louisiana. For the first time, an incumbent senator since 2012 on the Republican side has lost his primary. Now looking like the same thing is headed towards Texas. But you even saw that in the House primaries that took place in Texas earlier this year. Dan Crenshaw, who seemed electorally invincible just a couple of years ago, he goes down. Brandon Herrera, great guy, primaries and now successfully defeats Tony Gonzalez. Clearly, there is some type of attitude from the MAGA from the base over in Texas, the voter base, that we want these establishment losers out. And that's, of course, looking now to translate to the Senate primary as well. So, yeah, again, long story short, the RINOs here, and in this case, John Cornyn, doesn't stand a freaking chance, because now in 2026, the MAGA base in primaries, finally, after all this time, is starting to show up en masse and absolutely dominate, as they should have been all along. So
we have a great candidate, I believe, in Texas. I think probably he'll win very substantially. And I think he'll go on to defeat a very defective candidate, a candidate that believes in 6 genders, and he takes hits at Jesus Christ. He's a vegan in Texas, and you can't get elected as a vegan in Texas.
Republican Ken Paxton currently leads incumbent Senator John Cornyn in the polls, but Cornyn is insisting that he's the better option to defeat Democrat nominee James Tallarico.
There's going to be a veritable tsunami
Yeah, so I think it is pretty clear where this is headed, especially looking back to the many cases in past Republican primaries this year, including in Texas, where we know where the voter attitudes are lying in the Republican base, and they really are with the MAGA side. So I think you can basically take it to the bank. Make sure you vote in the election, but very likely here, Ken Paxton will not only win the nomination, he's going to win it quite convincingly. And you heard at the end the argument from Cornyn that, well, you may hate, this is basically what he's saying. You may hate me, I may suck, I may be the worst candidate ever, and you're going to begrudgingly vote for me, but look, I have a better chance at beating the Democrats in the general election in November. To which I say, you know, it is a valid argument, maybe to some degree, in the sense I could see what you're saying, but let's also just be realistic. When your only argument as a candidate is basically that I suck in every way, but maybe I'll do better hypothetically in the general election against the Democrats, you know, that's just not that inspiring. It's not that compelling of a reason to vote for you. And I'll also go back to, I'm not sure whether that's actually true. Because, you know, especially when you look back to 2018, for example, and a lot of the Republican incumbents who lost that year, and sometimes shocking cases because they've been in office 40 years, what was a huge contributing factor to that? The fact that they'd been in office for some 40 plus years and they weren't doing anything. And yes, those types of candidates may kind of keep the Democrats a little bit less energized to an extent. But let me break some news to you. It's 2026. Trump is the president. The Democrats are going to show up to vote anyway. Okay, they're pissed. They're going to show up in record numbers, I would assume, frankly. We have to predict that. We have to be able to forecast that, right? We have to have candidates on our side that our voters are excited to go for. If not, what's the point? They're not going to show up. Democrats likely will win. And so, sure, I understand. I'm not denying that we're going to have to work hard to get Paxton over the finish line. He does have the scandals. He does have the baggage. Whatever you think of them, they will be used against him. Okay, we have to forecast that, anticipate 100%. But at the same time, is he actually less electable in an election year like this than Cornyn? I don't think that's guaranteed. I think that's something that really is sort of up in the air. Like, you can make an argument for both sides. So my stance this entire time has likewise been similar to Trump's. That's why I haven't commented too much on this Texas primary before, because I thought the Trump deal made perfect sense. It's like, okay, maybe we're thinking Cornyn more electable, something. We're going to hold off, see how the primary goes, first of all, see what the attitude is for Paxton, because if he had gotten 10%, then you probably don't want to endorse that guy, but he basically was neck and neck with Cornyn. We saw that Senate Republicans did not pass the SAVE Act. That was the deal. Okay, they're not going to get that done. We're all in for Paxton. And that's exactly what happened, and now we have a bunch of RINO Republicans crying the victim. Why would Trump do this to us? That's why. I mean, it really is quite simple. So there you have it, and yet another case of when Republican leadership or the GOP establishment fails to get something done, then they go one-on-one with Trump and MAGA, who wins every single time. You know, you think at a certain point you'd start to learn a lesson about these things, but if we got to keep on doing it, we got to keep on doing it. So we're going to have to work hard, as I said, for Paxton in November, but I'd argue, honestly, to a strong extent, we would have had to work hard for Cornyn as well, because he's just so bland and uninspiring. He wouldn't get voter turnout. And on a midterm year, we're the incumbent party. We're going to need the voter turnout. So at least if we have to work hard for someone, I'd prefer to work hard for somebody that we're enthusiastic for, rather than this guy which is like, we hate him, we can't stand him, but, you know, like, he's the Republican, so we got to do it. Oftentimes, if you actually really look at the record here, oftentimes those types of candidates don't do well either, right? You need someone who the voters actually like on your side. Turnout influences elections a lot. That's the truth. So there you have that, though. Total defeat, big wins for us in South Carolina, in Texas. There you go. Keep the ball rolling here. That said, let me know your thoughts. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new. And until next time, God bless and peace.